The Guardian's Riddle. There are different approaches to interpreting fate. One of them is that fate is fate, something predetermined in advance. No matter how you twist it, you can't escape fate. On the one hand, such an interpretation is depressing in its hopelessness. It turns out that if a person has encountered a fate that is not of the highest quality, then there is no hope for improvement. But on the other hand, there are always people who are satisfied with this state of affairs. After all, it is convenient and reliable when the future is more or less predictable and does not frighten you with its uncertainty. And yet, the fatal inevitability of fate in this understanding causes a feeling of dissatisfaction and internal protest. A person deprived of luck complains about his fate. Why is life so unfair? One has everything in abundance, while the other is constantly in need. For one, everything comes easy, while for the other, he spins like a squirrel in a wheel, and all to no avail. Nature endows one with beauty, intelligence, and strength, while the other, it is not clear for what sins, bears the second-class label all his life. Why is there such inequality? Why does life, which has no boundaries in its diversity, impose any restrictions on certain groups of people? What were the less fortunate ones guilty of? The deprived person feels resentment, if not indignation, and tries to find for himself some explanation for this state of affairs. And then all kinds of teachings appear, like karma for sins in past lives. One might think that the Lord God is only engaged in raising his careless children, but even with all his power, he experiences difficulties with this very process of education. Instead of punishing for sins during life, God for some reason postpones retribution until later, although what is the point of punishing a person for what he does not remember? There is another version of inequality, encouraging in that those in need and suffering will now receive generous compensation, but again, either somewhere in heaven or in some next life. Be that as it may, such explanations cannot be completely satisfying. Whether these past and future lives exist or not is practically unimportant, because a person remembers and is aware of only one, this life, and in this sense, it is his only one. If you believe in the predetermination of fate, then the best remedy for melancholy will be humility. And again, new explanations are found like, if you want to be happy, stay optimistic, and be content with what you have. A person is given to understand he is unhappy because he is always dissatisfied and wants too much. And by definition, you should be satisfied. You need to enjoy life. The person seems to agree, but at the same time, it is somehow awkward for him to greet the gray reality with joy. Doesn't he have the right to want something more? Why force yourself to be happy? After all, it's the same as forcing yourself to love. There are always some enlightened personalities scurrying around, calling for universal love and forgiveness. You can pull this illusion over yourself, like a blanket over your head, so as not to directly face the harsh reality, and then it actually becomes easier. But deep down in his soul, a person still cannot understand why he should force himself to forgive those whom he hates and love those to whom he is indifferent. What good does this do him? The result is not natural, but forced happiness. As if joy should not come on its own, but you need to squeeze it out of yourself, like paste from a tube. Of course, there are people who do not believe that life is so boring and primitive that it comes down to one predetermined fate. They do not want to be satisfied with what they have, and prefer to enjoy achievements rather than what is given. For such people, there is a different concept of fate. Man is the architect of his own happiness. Well, as you know, you have to fight for happiness. How else? Knowledgeable people will say that nothing comes so easily. It would seem that the fact is indisputable. If you do not want to accept happiness as it is given to you, then you need to work with your elbows and achieve your goal. Cautionary stories show how heroes fought courageously and worked selflessly day and night, overcoming unimaginable obstacles. The winners achieved the laurels of success only after going through all the hardships of persistent struggle. But all is not well here either. Millions fight and work, but only a few achieve true success. You can spend your whole life desperately fighting for a place in the sun, but never achieve anything. Why is this life so cruel and intractable? What a painful necessity it is to fight the world and achieve your goal. And if the world does not give in, then you need to fight with yourself. If you are so poor, sick, ugly, unhappy, then it's your own fault. You yourself are imperfect, and therefore you must change. A person is faced with the fact that he is initially a collection of shortcomings and vices that need to be worked hard on. A sad picture, isn't it? It turns out that if a person was immediately unlucky and was not born rich and happy, then his destiny is either to humbly carry his cross or to devote his whole life to struggle. Somehow the soul cannot rejoice in such a life. Is there really no silver lining in all this hopelessness? And yet, there is a way out. The solution is as simple as it is pleasant, unlike all of the above, because it lies on a completely different plane. The concept of fate in transurfing is based on a fundamentally different model of the world. Don't rush to wave your hands in disappointment and exclaim that they are trying to foist some kind of chimera on you. Agree, after all, each of the known concepts of fate is built on a certain worldview, which, in turn, is based on some unprovable starting points. For example, materialism is based on the assertion that matter is primary and consciousness is secondary. Idealism says just the opposite. Neither one nor the other statement is provable nevertheless. On their basis, models of the world are built, each of which is very convincing and finds loyal defenders. Both directions in philosophy, science, and religion explain this world in their own way, and they are right and wrong in their own way. We will never be able to describe absolutely exactly the absolute truth, because the concepts we use are themselves relative. The famous parable of the three blind men tells how one of them felt the trunk of an elephant, another the leg, the third the ear, and then each made his own judgment about what this animal was like. Therefore, proving that one description is the only correct one and the other is not is completely pointless. The main thing is that this description works. You are probably familiar with the well-known idea that reality is an illusion that we ourselves create, although no one has really explained where this illusion comes from. So we all watch movies. This, of course, is very doubtful, but in a certain sense, there is a reasonable grain here. There is another opinion that everything is quite the opposite. The material world is only a mechanism operating according to strict laws, and our consciousness cannot determine anything here. And there is an undeniable grain of truth in this too. But the human mind is designed in such a way that it strives to have solid ground under its feet, devoid of ambiguity. I just want to smash one theory to smithereens and put another on a pedestal, which is what scientists have been doing for thousands of years. After each battle for truth on the battlefield, only one fact remains undefeated. Any theory represents only a separate aspect of the manifestation of a multifaceted reality. Each theory is confirmed by time, and therefore has the right to exist. Any concept of life also works. If you decide for yourself that fate is something predetermined that you cannot change, then so be it. In this case, you voluntarily give yourself into the wrong hands, no matter whose, and become a boat sailing at the will of the waves. If you believe that you create your own destiny, then you consciously take responsibility for everything that happens in your life. You are struggling with the waves, trying to control your boat. Notice what happens. Your choice is always implemented. What you choose is what you get. Whatever worldview you choose, the truth will be on your side. And others will argue with you precisely because they are also right. If any phenomenon of the manifestation of reality is taken as a starting point, then an entire branch of knowledge can be derived from it. And this knowledge will be internally consistent. It will successfully reflect one of the manifestations of reality. To base a whole knowledge, it is enough to take only one or a few facts that are not fully understood, but still exist. For example, quantum physics is based on several unprovable truths postulates. They are unprovable because they themselves serve as the original starting point of knowledge. An object of the microworld in quantum physics behaves in some cases like a particle, and in others like a wave. Scientists were unable to unambiguously interpret such dualism, so they simply accepted it as a given, that is, as an axiom. The postulates of quantum physics reconcile the variety of forms of manifestation of reality, as if the blind people agreed that in one case, an elephant behaves like a pillar, and in another like a snake. If, when describing an object of the microworld, we choose its particle property as the main one, then we will get a model of the atom, which was built by the famous physicist Niels Bohr. In this model, electrons orbit around a nucleus like the planets in the solar system. If we choose a wave as the main property, then the atom will look like a blurry spot. Both one and the other model works, reflecting individual forms of manifestation of reality. Again, it turns out that we get what we choose. In general, any manifestation can serve as a postulate, a starting point for a branch of knowledge which will certainly work and have the right to exist. In their pursuit of truth, people have always sought to understand the nature of the world by studying its individual aspects. Masses of scientific knowledge were created as descriptions and explanations of certain natural phenomena. This is how separate branches of knowledge arose, often conflicting with each other. The nature of the world is one, but constantly shows different guises. Before people have time to properly examine and explain one face, another appears, which in no way agrees with the previous one. Scientists are trying to unite the various manifestations of reality in order to eliminate contradictions, but this is difficult. There is only one single, undeniable fact that unites and reconciles all branches of knowledge: the diversity and versatility of the forms of manifestation of reality. The multivariance of our world is its first fundamental property. Carried away by attempts to explain individual manifestations, adherents of various branches of knowledge for some reason bypass this particular fact. In fact, it would seem, what else can be learned from this? Multivariance serves as a reference point, like zero on a coordinate grid. Any starting points of various branches of knowledge are secondary in relation to it. However, they do not pay attention to the original point itself, as if it does not contain any information. And yet, the information is there, and it is quite surprising. To solve the Guardian's riddle, we will take the property of multivariance as a starting point. In other words, let us accept as a postulate the fact that reality has an infinite variety of forms of manifestation. Despite the general nature of our postulate, we will see how interesting and unexpected knowledge it reveals. Let's start with the fact that the forms of manifestation of reality must have a source from which all this diversity comes. Where are all the laws of our world written down? It manifests itself as the movement of matter in space and time. This movement obeys certain laws. As you know, points are located on the graph of a function according to a certain mathematical formula. We can say that the law of movement of a point on a graph is the definition of a function. But formulas, like laws, are abstract inventions of the human mind, created for ease of understanding. It is highly unlikely that nature stores them somewhere. How else can you record the location of points on a graph? Of course, in the form of an infinitely large array of coordinates of all points. Human memory capacity is limited and cannot cope with huge volumes. But for nature, infinity is not a problem. She does not need to summarize the location and movement of points on the graph in the form of a formula. If you divide the line of a function into infinitesimal points, then each point can be considered as a cause and the one following it as an effect. As a result, any movement of a material point in space and time can be represented as an infinitely long continuous chain of infinitesimal causes and effects. In our knowledge, we represent the movement of matter in the form of a law, and in nature, this movement is inherent in its natural form, as an infinite number of causes and effects. Roughly speaking, data about all possible points of motion of matter are stored in a certain field of information, which we will call the space of options. It contains information about everything that was, is, and will be. The space of options is a completely material information structure. This is an endless field of information containing all possible options for any event that can happen. We can say that in the space of options there is everything. We won't guess how this information is stored for our purposes, it doesn't matter. The only important thing is that the space of options serves as a template, a coordinate grid for any movement of matter in space and time. At each point in space, there is its own version of this or that event. To facilitate understanding, we will assume that the option consists of a script and scenery. The scenery is the appearance or form of manifestation, and the script is the path along which matter moves. For convenience, you can divide the space of options into sectors. Each of them has its own scenario and scenery. The greater the distance between sectors, the greater the differences in scenarios and scenery. The fate of a person is also presented with many options. Theoretically, there are no restrictions on the scenarios and settings of human existence, since the space of options is infinite. Any minor event can influence the turn of fate. Human life, like any other movement of matter, is a chain of causes and effects. An effect in the space of options is always located close to its cause. One thing follows another, so the sectors of fate line up in lifelines. The scenarios and scenery of the sectors on one such line are more or less homogeneous. A person's life flows measuredly in one direction until an event occurs that changes the scenario and scenery. Then fate makes a turn and moves to another line of life. Imagine that you watched a play. The next day, you came to the theater again for the same performance, but it was already performed with different scenery. These are closely spaced lifelines. In the next theater season, you saw a play with the same actors, but with significant changes in the script. This lifeline is located further away. And finally, having watched the same production in another theater, you saw a completely different interpretation of the play. This lifeline is already very far from the first one. Reality manifests itself in all its diversity precisely because the number of options is infinite. Any starting point results in a chain of cause and effect relationships. By choosing a starting point, you get one or another form of manifestation of reality. We can say that reality unfolds along the line of life, depending on the chosen starting point. Everyone gets what they choose. You have the right to choose precisely because an infinity of options already exists. Nobody forbids you to choose a destiny to your liking. All control of fate comes down to just one simple thing, making a choice. Transurfing answers the question of how to do it. So, there is an information structure containing an infinite number of potential possibilities options with their own scenarios and decorations. The movement of material realization occurs in accordance with what is inherent in this structure. The process of matter moving through the space of options can be demonstrated in the form of the following thought experiment. Imagine a tube filled with water. A cooling ring moves slowly along the tube so that the water quickly freezes only inside the ring. It turns out that the ice crystal moves through the tube with water. Water molecules remain in approximately the same places in a relatively free state. At the moment the ring passes, the molecules inside it are fixed in a frozen crystal of a certain structure, and then the water in this place thaws again, and the molecules are released. The crystal itself does not move. In other words, in this case, ice does not float in water. It is not the ice crystal itself that moves in the tube with water, but the structure, that is, the frozen state. By analogy, water in a tube is the space of options, and an ice crystal is the material realization of options. Molecules are people, and their position in the crystal structure is realized as a variant of fate. There is no clear answer to the question of what a cooling ring is an analog of. In other words, how and why does an information structure turn into matter? In the microcosm, matter can manifest itself as a clot of energy. It is known that in a vacuum, there is a continuous process of creation and destruction of microparticles. Matter seems to exist, but at the same time, it does not have actual material substance. Only one thing is clear: what you can touch has an intangible energy basis. I hope I didn't bore you too much with physics. So far, we are only at the starting point of transurfing, but what you learn from this book may shock you to a certain extent. Therefore, I inevitably have to provide at least some theoretical justification so that the mind does not lose ground under its feet. So I ask you to have a little more patience. A sea wave can serve as another analogy illustrating the implementation of options in space. Let's say that as a result of an earthquake, a wave is formed in the sea. It moves along the surface of the sea in the form of a hump, but the water itself remains in place. It is not the mass of water that moves, but the realization of energy potential. Only near the shore does the water splash onto land. Any other waves behave the same way. In this analogy, the sea is the space of options, and the wave is the material realization. What happens? On the one hand, the material implementation moves in space and time, and on the other, the options remain in place and exist forever. It turns out that everything was, is, and will be. And actually, why not? Time is actually as static as space. The passage of time is felt only when the film is spinning and the frames follow each other. Unroll the film and look at all the frames together. Where did the time go? All frames exist simultaneously. Time is static until we begin to view it sequentially frame by frame. This is exactly what happens in life, so the idea that everything comes and goes is deeply ingrained in our minds. In fact, everything that is written in the information field has always been there and will always remain there. Lifelines exist like films. What has passed has not disappeared, but remains. What is yet to come is already here. The current segment of life is the material realization of the space of options on a given segment of the lifeline. Many can express their indignation by asking, how is it possible that countless options for my fate exist stationary? Who might need this and why? God? Natural laws? Why? Then try to imagine a point on the coordinate plane. Back at school, we were offered the following model. A point on a plane can have any x and y coordinates. Note, any, from minus to plus infinity. Why doesn't it occur to anyone to ask the question, why can a point have any coordinates? The space of options serves as a template. It determines how the material realization should manifest itself. Imagine a dark forest and a man with a flashlight. A man walks through the forest and illuminates a small area around him. Realization appears as a spot of light. the whole dark forest is the space of options, and the illuminated area is the implementation of the option in this area. What is the backlight? In other words, what ignites, that is, materializes a variant of the template? To answer this question, we will have to choose another starting point. Nowadays, there is no longer any doubt about the fact that thoughts are material. Reality shows itself to us in two forms. On the one hand, being determines consciousness, and on the other, there is indisputable evidence of the opposite. Thoughts are not only the motive for human actions, but also have a direct impact on the surrounding reality. For example, our worst expectations usually come true. Of course, one can argue that what is taking place here is not the materialization of thoughts, but a premonition of impending troubles. Indeed, there is much that is unclear and ambiguous in paranormal phenomena. But this does not mean that this form of manifestation of reality can be ignored. There are many facts confirming the direct influence of thoughts on the surrounding reality. One way or another, a person's consciousness shapes his destiny. This book is about exactly how all this happens. We will take the following statement as a starting point. The emission of mental energy materializes a potential option. We have every right to do this, since reality also manifests itself in a form in which consciousness determines reality. This is confirmed not only by facts from everyday life, but also by experiments in quantum physics. For us, the mechanism of interaction of mental radiation with the space of options is not of fundamental importance. It still remains unclear how the process of information transfer occurs on an energy or some other basis. For convenience, we will simply assume that the radiation of mental energy illuminates a certain sector of the space of options, as a result of which the option receives its material embodiment. Radiation, like the sector, has certain parameters. Mental radiation finds its sector, the option is realized, and thus it turns out that consciousness determines reality. We should not just forget that this is only one of the forms of manifestation of reality. You cannot just sit and shape your reality through contemplation alone. Although there are people who can literally materialize objects out of thin air, but there are only a few of them, and they do not advertise their abilities. And yet, thoughts have as strong an impact on a person's fate as his specific actions. People are accustomed to the fact that their actions entail visible and easily explainable consequences. The influence of thoughts manifests itself unnoticed, and therefore inexplicable and unpredictable. It may seem difficult to establish a clear causal connection between thoughts and subsequent events. But soon you will see that a person's thoughts shape reality in a completely direct way. A person gets what he chooses. Someone may object. It turns out that these seas, mountains, planets, galaxies, everything is a product of my mental radiation. It is sometimes common for a person to consider himself the center of the universe. In fact, it occupies only a tiny niche in this endless space. Our world is inhabited by many living organisms, and each contributes to the formation of reality. Each creature has its own parameters of mental radiation. If you are uncomfortable considering the radiation of a plant as mental, call it differently. The essence does not change. It is impossible to even say with certainty that inanimate objects have nothing similar to the radiation of living organisms, not to mention the one Spirit who pervades all things, whom we call God. Each creature has its own consciousness and forms a layer of its own world. We can say that everything in this world carries a particle of God, and thus He controls the whole world. Each person follows his own line of life, and at the same time, all people live in the same world. The material world is the same for everyone, but the specific realization is different for each person. Let's say you're a tourist and you're walking through a beautiful city. You admire the sights, admire the beauty of the architecture, See flower beds, fountains, park alleys, and the smiling faces of successful citizens. In the place where you pass, near the trash can, a homeless man stopped. He, just like you, is in the same world and not in another dimension. And yet, he sees something completely different from what you see. He sees an empty bottle in the trash can, a dirty wall, his competitor who didn't get to the bottle earlier and is now thinking about whether to take it away, a policeman with a suspicious glance. All manifestations of material nature have an energetic basis. The energy field is primary. All other physical manifestations are secondary. Scientists are trying to unite different manifestations of energy within a single theory, and soon they will have results. However, then you will have to combine something again, since the number of forms of manifestation of reality is infinite. Without going into all these subtleties, let's consider energy as a kind of abstract force that is invisible, but nevertheless objectively exists. For our purposes, it is quite enough to accept the fact that the energy of human thoughts is completely material. The energy of thoughts does not spin closed in a person's head, but spreads in space and interacts with the surrounding energy field. Few people will dispute this fact now. For convenience, we can take its frequency as a parameter of mental radiation, similar to the frequency of radio waves. When you think about something, the energy frequency of your thoughts is tuned to a specific area in the space of options. When energy enters the sector of the space of options, the material implementation of this option arises. Energy has a complex structure and permeates everything that is in this world. Passing through the human body, energy is modulated by thoughts, and at the output acquires parameters corresponding to these thoughts. A radio transmitter works on the same principle. Energy parameters absorb the characteristics of thoughts. Thus, the output is mental radiation, which transforms the sector of the space of options into material realization. When you think about good or bad, you radiate the energy of thoughts into the space of options. The modulated energy is applied to a specific sector, and this makes corresponding changes in your life. Life circumstances are shaped not only by specific actions, but also by the nature of a person's thoughts. If you are hostile to the world, it will respond in kind to you. If you constantly express your dissatisfaction, there will be more and more reasons for this. If negativism prevails in your attitude towards reality, then the world will turn its worst side towards you. On the contrary, a positive attitude will naturally change your life for the better. A person gets what he chooses. This is reality, whether you like it or not. As long as your thoughts are more or less homogeneous in direction, you are on the same line of life. As soon as the attitude towards reality changes in one direction or another, the parameters of mental radiation acquire new characteristics, and the material realization of the layer of your world moves to another line. There, events unfold according to a different scenario, in accordance with the parameters of your radiation. If the scenario is unfavorable for some reason, you will fight, trying to change the situation. Everyone, when faced with obstacles, reacts negatively, expressing dissatisfaction or becoming despondent. Your mental radiation is rearranged onto a line where there are even more obstacles. As a result, it turns out that life is going somewhere down an inclined plane. This process seems uncontrollable, but in fact, it is you who direct your implementation into problem areas of the space of options with your thoughts. You believe that your actions overcome obstacles. But in reality, it turns out that you get what you chose yourself. If you choose to fight obstacles, you will receive them in abundance. Absorbed in thoughts about problems, and they are always present in your life. You direct your actions to change the situation on the current lifeline, but you cannot change the scenario in this space of options. You are only able to choose another. When you try to change the undesirable points in the script, you think about exactly what you don't like. Thus, your choice is successfully implemented, and you get what you don't want. It is impossible to change anything on this lifeline. In the same way, when you are in an art gallery, you cannot remove or rearrange an exhibition that does not suit you. You are not the boss here, but no one forbids you to turn around and move to another room to look at what you like best. Of course, the transition to a line of life where everyone has their needs does not happen simply at will. Not all thoughts can be realized, and not all desires come true. And the point here is not in the content of thoughts, but in their quality. Just a dream or desire is not a choice. Dreams don't come true. It is necessary to fulfill certain conditions, which you will learn about after reading this book. In the space of options, there are an infinite number of fate lines for each person. We have no reason to be offended by our fate because we have been given the right to choose. Our only problem is that we don't know how to do it. The world manifests itself in all its diversity. It seems to be created in order to satisfy any needs. Everyone can find here whatever their heart desires. Even in different directions of knowledge, it turns to us the side that we want to see. For example, idealism claims that the world is an illusion, and he agrees. Materialism says the opposite, and the world again has nothing against it. People quarrel among themselves, imposing their views on the world on each other, and the world shows that they are all right. Well, isn't this wonderful? The space of options is the so-called illusion, and material realization is what is meant by the material world. We always get what we choose. Anyone who is familiar with the principles of Islam knows what the words "man's destiny" is written in the book mean. This means that fate is predetermined and you can't escape it. Similar statements are found in other religions. Indeed, a person's fate is already predetermined. The only mistake of religions is that there is not one version of this fate, but an infinite number. You can't escape fate. And this is true to some extent, because you cannot change the scenario of the option. Fighting with the world around you to change your destiny is a very difficult and thankless task. You shouldn't try to change the scenario. You can just choose the option you like. Of course, all this is very unusual and raises reasonable doubts. But I didn't expect you to readily accept the options model. I myself didn't believe it until I was convinced that transurfing works, and without fail. There is no point in giving preference to one model or another just for the purpose of achieving some absolute truth. What matters is not the model itself, but the practical result that it allows to obtain. Different mathematical models can represent the same physical phenomenon in different ways. Wouldn't it be funny if specialists in analytical geometry suddenly took up arms against mathematical analysis and began to prove that geometry is the only correct mathematical discipline? Mathematicians were able to agree among themselves, but philosophers and religious figures were not. Where is it located, this space of options? This question is very difficult to answer. From the point of view of our three-dimensional perception, we can say that it is everywhere and nowhere. Imagine an endless plane without beginning or end, in which two-dimensional people live. They don't suspect that there is a third dimension. It seems to them that the plane is the only world, and they cannot understand how there can be anything else beyond it. But nevertheless, we know that if we add a third dimension to this model, an infinite number of such planes can be created. So don't be bothered by the fact that we are not able to clearly imagine how, along with our world, an infinite number of parallel worlds can exist. It is difficult to believe in the reality of the existence of parallel worlds. But on the other hand, is it easy for you to believe in the theory of relativity, according to which as the speed of a body increases, its mass increases, its size decreases, and time slows down? It is not yet possible to verify this from personal experience. The important thing is not whether we understand it or not, but what practical benefits we can derive from it. In a boundless space, arguing about the advantages of one model or another is simply ridiculous and petty. Imagine infinity towards increasing distances. There, in the distance, there is no edge. Infinity in the direction of decreasing distances, oddly enough, also has no limit. We can only observe a limited part of the visible universe. Both the telescope and the microscope have their limits. Infinity in the direction of the microworld is no different from the infinity of the macroworld. There is a hypothesis that the universe we see occurred as a result of the Big Bang. Since then, it has supposedly expanded continuously. Bodies move in space at tremendous speed. But, on the other hand, also taking into account the enormous distances, it seems to us that the expansion of the universe is taking a very long time and slowly. It is also known that in a vacuum, at every moment of time, elementary particles are born out of nowhere and immediately disappear. Considering the relativity of space and time, nothing prevents us from considering each such particle as a separate universe similar to ours. After all, we do not know the structure of elementary particles. For physicists, they appear either in the form of waves or in the form of particles. Moving further and further into the microworld, relative distances become just as enormous and time slows down again for the inner observer. For an external observer, our universe exists for one moment, like a particle born and extinguished in emptiness. But for us, as internal observers, the universe lives for billions of years. When you take a sip of coffee, think, how many universes have you swallowed? An infinite set, because infinity is not divided into parts. You can fly into the microworld just as far and for a long time as into the vast expanses of outer space. Time, like space, is infinite, both forward and backward. Segments of time can be both infinitely small and large. Any point on a time period can be considered as a reference point, on both sides of which there is an infinity of time. Moving the reference point along a period of time does not change anything, neither ahead nor behind. All this infinity of worlds nested within each other exists simultaneously. The center of the universe is located simultaneously at every point, because any point on any side is surrounded by the same infinity. And all events exist simultaneously for the same reason that the center of the universe is at any point at the same time. It's hard to imagine, but it is also impossible to capture infinity with one glance. No matter how much you move mentally around the universe, the same infinity extends further. There are even more convoluted theories, according to which our visible universe turns into a finite sphere in four-dimensional space. But this does not make it any easier, because theoretically, again, there can be an infinite number of dimensions. Unable to imagine all this, we are forced to be content with our narrow horizons and pretend that we understand something. In modern science, there is generally a lot that is incomprehensible and inexplicable, but this does not prevent us from enjoying its fruits. Applying the principles, transurfing, you will get stunning results. Let's just agree right away not to torment ourselves with questions about why and how exactly this works. With the same success, a child can ask a physicist, why do bodies attract each other? The scientist will answer, because the law of gravity operates. This will be answered by a new question. Why does the law of gravity apply? Still, why do bodies attract? No answer. So let's leave this thankless task of explaining something and just use the results of the variance model. It is not given to us to know and understand everything. From the model of options, it follows that a person creates his own destiny. Nevertheless, the concept of fate in transurfing differs from the generally known ones. What's the difference? The fact is that you can choose your happiness and not fight for it. Do not rush to immediately accept or reject the options model. Just ask yourself the question, how much have you achieved in the fight against the world for your happiness? Everyone decides for themselves whether to continue to act in the same spirit or try a different method. After all, you can spend your whole life fighting, but never achieve anything. Isn't it easier to make the world itself come to meet you halfway? After all he does is implement your choice. The selected order is always executed unconditionally. But choice is not a desire, but something else that you have to learn about. Wishes come true only in fairy tales. It is not for nothing that the belief has taken root that fulfilling desires is either very difficult or impossible. We have taken only the first step towards solving the overseer's mystery. Soon you will find out why wishes are not fulfilled and dreams do not come true. Summary. Reality has an infinite variety of forms of manifestation. The multivariance of the world is its first fundamental property. Any model represents only a separate aspect of the manifestation of reality. Any branch of knowledge is based on a selected aspect of the manifestation of reality. Your choice is always implemented. What you choose is what you get. The space of options is a field of information about what was, is, and will be. The information field contains potential options for any event. The option consists of a script and scenery. The space can be divided into sectors, each of which has its own option. The greater the distance between sectors, the greater the differences in options. Sectors with approximately homogeneous parameters are lined up in lifelines. Material realization moves in space like a clot of density. The emission of mental energy materializes a potential option. Each organism contributes to the formation of material realization. When the radiation parameters change, a transition to another line occurs. You cannot change the scenarios, but you are able to choose another one. There is no need to fight for happiness. You can simply choose the option you like.